right. Well, welcome back to my channel, everyone. I am Brooke Carlock. For those of you who don't know me, I have a grief support channel, and I have been looking forward so much to this interview ever since I met my guest. So I met James at Vid Summit this year, and we sort of, I would say, immediately gravitated toward each other because there were so many gaming channels and different kind of channels, but there didn't seem to be as many channels that were specifically for helping other people. So James and I kind of found each other in a breakout group and realized it was a really good fit as far as each other's channels. So I'll let him tell you what his channel is. It's called My Stepdad, but he'll talk about kind of why he started it and what he does. But I think that you will find that it is very, very appropriate for a lot of the people in my audience that have lost a specific person. So welcome, James. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I'm thrilled that we met there in Vid Summit. I'm glad. I didn't know you won your ticket, so that's pretty cool.
I did, yeah. Wasn't that cool?
So that was cool. Yeah.
So do we want to start out? You can tell me what your channel, I know what it is, but you can tell my audience what your channel is and kind of why you started it.
Sure. So I grew up without a dad. My parents were divorced. They separated actually before I was even born. I'm not sure looking back at it now if mom knew she was expecting me when my parents split up. But they'd already had 4 kids. So anyway, I grew up without my dad in the home, and I look around today and I see that's a lot more common. Back then, I was the outlier, right? It was, I could get sympathy from people because, your parents are divorced. Today, unfortunately, it's much more common. So for the kids that are growing up without parents, that's also more normal, but I don't think it's made it any less challenging. And for me, the perspective is the kids. I mean, that's who I started the channel for, and particularly for young men and for boys, for a couple of reasons. The most obvious one is that was my experience.
Right.
I grew up as a young man without a dad in the home, and there's a lot of challenges with that. And when I look around in the world and my professional environment, I left my career back in 2018, 5.5 years ago, to do this. But even before then, there's a lot of support things encouraging young women, particularly in STEM. I actually worked for a rocket motor company and worked in the auto industry for a lot of years. And, there's a lot to encourage young women to come into the technical fields, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's fantastic. But, through my experience, and so I look at that and I think, if I was growing up and my dad wasn't there and I'd see something like this, how I would interpret that as a fatherless young man is like, you're not wanted. We don't want you there. It's not for you. And I know that's not the intended message, but that's how I would see it. And my fear, my concern is that that's how a young man today would see it. And so it's just, there's a lot of, the cards are stacked against a young man that's growing up and doesn't have a positive male role model in his life. And we're seeing the effects of it in society. So that's a long-winded answer for you, but that's why I started the channel. I got to tell you the other part though too, because when I was a teenager, there was a guy in my neighborhood, and he kind of became my surrogate dad in a lot of ways. He was a leader in the scout group that when I turned 12, I went into scouts, and he was one of the leaders there. But he just lived around the corner and down the street a little ways, so he was close. And I ended up going over to his house on Sundays and watching football and having snacks. And he'd take me camping with him and his family, and he taught me how to ride a motorcycle. And when mom's car needed brakes, he'd come over and help me fix her brakes. So he became that surrogate dad for me. And a lot of it is why I started the channel, is frankly to pay his kindness and his love to me forward, because I think there's a lot more young men than there were when I was in that boat that don't have a positive male role model or someone to ask questions to, or to help them. So that's why I started it.
Yeah, definitely. I obviously I wasn't a boy, but I I had 3 brothers and my parents were
Yeah.
divorced,
Yeah.
and my dad wasn't around a lot either. We saw him every other weekend.
Uh-huh.
So he wasn't, like a constant presence in the house. And I just keep thinking, like, for my brothers, how nice this would have been. And even for me, honestly. And
Yeah.
I myself have two boys and they're grown now, but same thing. I was a single mom for a while,
Uh-huh.
and I look at the videos on your channel and I can see what you're talking about, like just the kind of, I love the everyday things,
Yeah.
and also the big deep things that you teach them, that really, having that fatherly influence, they don't get. Not that moms aren't great,
Yeah.
but
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's,
yeah, but even for single moms, it's I think I said to you before, even for the single moms
yeah.
that I know, like, I can look at your channel and be like, I want to watch that video so I can show it to my sons or teach
Yeah.
them how to do something. And I think in particular for my channel, I'm thinking, right away about people who have lost a dad, not that he's absent, but people whose fathers have died, or moms who have lost their husbands and now are looking for that male influence and role model for their kids. I think the things that you do are just so unbelievably helpful for that kind of demographic. Can you just tell a little bit about some of the topics that you cover on your channel? Like, what are some of your videos? I know you're on Instagram, you're kind of all over the place, but what are some of the general topics that you cover?
Yeah. It's funny. When I started the channel, I thought it'd be like my stepdad. His name was Mark Gould, the guy I talked to you. I mentioned
Yeah.
the scout leader and he was there till well after I was married. And in fact, my wife and I would go camping with him and his wife and other couples too later. But when I started the channel, I was thinking of him, and it was just, if I'm doing something around the house, I'm going to grab the camera and film it, because it's like, hey, if I'm your dad and you're in my home, this is what life would be like, so
Right.
here. So, I mean, in terms of topics, that the most watched video on YouTube, I haven't checked lately, but it's how to shave a cat at home. because we, it gets the summer and spring and they start shedding, and my daughter was the one that helped me with that one. And so, it ranges from how to shave a cat to 10 steps to winterize your home, to prepare your home for winter, which it's that time of year now. So I got to do that one. I did that one last year, to cooking things, how to cook stuff, how to sweep the floor, how to clean the dryer vent out, lawn care, mowing the lawn, checking your oil, changing a tire, but I also, I started doing it honestly because it's easy. Those kind of videos are a little tougher to make and edit, and they take a little more effort. But I love doing those too. But I do a Monday morning. It evolved into a Monday shave video. So I just talk about something while I'm shaving, and
Yeah.
and those topics I try to figure out. Okay, and I'll look back. Like today, I recorded one a day. It's not Monday, but I recorded one a day for a Monday about a time when I was in junior high, and there were a couple kids that were bullying me. And as a boy, it's like, it would have been a good time to have a dad,
Yeah.
because I probably could have talked to my dad about that. But I feel like if I talked to my mom, well, what's she going to do in my mind? And she might have just been fantastic with it. But in my childhood mind, it's like, well, she's going to go tell the principal, and then I'm going to be branded as a mama's boy. And that's the
Right.
only thing I can think of that would be worse than getting beat up after school, because that's what they were threatening me that they were going to do for the better part of you. So I tell that story, or I don't know, pick a topic and ramble on. And it's more about ideas or thoughts or feelings or encouragement or funny stories, asking a girl on a date, and it's been a while. My wife and I've been married for 32 years, well, almost
Oh, that's
32.
awesome.
Yeah, so it's been a while since I've had to go through the social fear of asking a girl out. We still date, my wife and I. We still go on dates, but it's not that stressful to ask her out. So anyway, whatever the topic is that I come up with, or a lot of times I get questions too, and
Mhm.
I'll try to pick those questions and answer them. Most of the time they're how to do things, but occasionally it's how to deal with, the love of my life left me. How do you deal with heartbreak or anger or things like that? And give my best Dr. Laura advice or Dr. Phil or whatever.
Yeah.
Stepdad advice, I guess it is, for what it's worth. But
It is, but I love that. I love that it encompasses such a broad range from like the everyday simple tasks that like you hardly think about until your toilet stops running and you have no idea
yeah,
what to
yeah,
do, to those big kind of life questions. And the thing that you said about, having your heart broken and that kind of stuff, the love of my life left me. I remember you telling me that you also have, along with kind of younger boys,
yeah,
you also have the older men who have grown up without a dad and are now trying to learn how to be dads themselves and how to be good husbands. And I love that you also make videos for those people who have gone through a similar experience as you, and you're kind of teaching them how to be good men. So
yeah. Hopefully,
yeah,
I, I mean, that's the intent. Yeah, I was a little surprised because when I started, my in my mind, my avatar, my target demographic was, from 14 to 18 or 20. And I got a whole bunch of demographic data, and the average age of those that were watching is more, they do it in buckets of 10 years, but it's like 25 to 34.
yeah,
It's not the younger ones. There are some, and I get questions from some, but it is an older demographic. And I think there's a reason for that. We're probably well in 2 generations of largely fatherless or absentee fathers in the home. And I
right.
think the effect is there's delayed maturation process. There's delayed, I don't know how to be a dad, and society doesn't require it of me or expect it of me. And I don't know what to do. So I'm just going to do whatever I'm doing, and until something catches my interest, to realize that, hey, maybe I'm behind the curve now. And whether you're 14 or 40, and you still got some things to overcome if you haven't dealt
Yeah,
with it.
absolutely. And even beyond that, I'm just thinking for my audience, like myself, I lost my dad recently, so
Yeah,
I kind of, I miss being able. There's still things. I'm 45, and I would
yeah,
love to be able to call him and ask him things. And I don't have a husband, so I don't have that male figure, to
yeah,
go to for that life experience of someone older than me at this point. So yeah, it's just so unbelievably nice of you to be sharing that knowledge for the people who need it. I know we'll get to your book in a little bit, but at the beginning of the book, I was I, I was just so moved at the beginning where you actually started with the death of your own father. Can you kind
mhm,
of take me through that a little bit? Just
yeah,
because my channel is a grief channel, kind of what it was like with your dad being kind
yeah,
of the absentee father. What was it like for you when he passed away?
yeah, yeah. Sure. I so he lived in Southern California at that time. Me and my family lived in Michigan. One of my brothers lived near him, and he was the only one that lived near him. So Dad's health was declining. And I should back up a little bit. You mentioned in your divorced
Mhm.
parents experience that you saw Dad every other weekend, right?
Right. Yep.
Well, our dad lived 800 miles away, so we saw him like 2 weeks a year, and
Okay.
so there's a lot of variation in the exposure that kids of divorced parents or single parents for whatever have, and different circumstances too. Like one young man posted, he said, "Thank you for doing this. My dad died when I was 6 on the operating
Mm.
table." And so in a case like that, then boy, that's a grief scenario. For me, it wasn't grief even when Dad passed, or growing up without a dad. I wouldn't describe it as grief, because it was just a state of existence.
Yeah.
Grief seems to be more of an acute. It's triggered by an event that's unexpected or traumatic, but at a point in time. And for me, I grew up without my dad the whole time. It was just my existence. And
Yeah.
even when Dad
Just
passed
it.
away, that's to answer your question. I felt like I should be really sad, and yet I was verging on anger.
Mm.
Um, and it's probably a good thing. if there's a YouTube channel that it's okay to cry on, it's probably this one. So if I get emotional,
Absolutely, bring it on.
I'm not at home, right? I mean, you've paved the path for me, but
Yeah.
it felt awkward to me when I finally got that call and hey, Dad passed away, and okay, and it was December, I think 2005, so it was coming into the holidays. And I remember just when I came home, it's like I didn't tell my coworkers. We were actually at a holiday luncheon,
Mm.
with my job, and I didn't say anything to them, and I just drove home after that, and I remember thinking it's like I should be sad, and yet I want to be angry, and the result was just this melancholy, seriousness. And why am I feeling this way? Because that's not what I would expect if my dad died. But it's because I hadn't had the chance to
Yeah.
have it out with him, honestly, to vent. To Why weren't you there for me?
Yeah.
Why did you leave us? Um, from the little kid perspective, Dad didn't leave Mom. Dad left me, and how could he do that?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. At least it has been for me, but for kids in general, and for boys in particular, because it's not okay to be emotional as a
Mm.
boy, or less so. It's more of a sign of weakness um, than manhood, or living up to an expectation, whether that's societally driven or internal or whatever. But it was weird. It was strange. It was not the feelings I anticipated when Dad passed away.
Yeah. Well, that is, it's a common reaction when you haven't had that interaction, and your anger, I would say, is totally justified. Um,
Mhm.
Having, not known him, and you're so right about, as a little kid, like it's so hard to grasp the fact that it's not your fault. You just wonder why.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, why Dad left me, when it wasn't you that he left. But yeah, for a little kid, it's almost impossible to not internalize that as it being your fault. And I know you
Mhm.
do talk about that in some of your videos, and I think in your book as well, that
Mhm.
it's not their fault. And even someone whose father has died,
Mhm.
e- everything you're saying still kind of, it applies to that situation as well. I think a lot of people who have fathers who weren't around probably share your feelings about the anger and the unresolved issues of it all. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I'm sorry that you
Well,
had to go through that.
so the grief part in the process for me was interesting, and I think you know it's tough. I mean, and in your situation, I can't imagine that. I mean, that would be tough. I mean, the toughest part for us was our children was a later term miscarriage, which was not easy. And I was thinking about before this interview. You asked me if there were times when I experienced grief, or if this was one. I thought, well, being fatherless, no. In my case, now, if I was like, my oldest brother was probably 7 or 8 years old when my parents split up. For him, it probably was traumatic,
Yeah.
and buried some of those. And I know, at least I understand that a lot of times kids in that situation will blame themselves, and they'll internalize it. Did I do something wrong that caused my parents to split up?
Right.
And you get to adulthood and you understand intellectually that that's not what happened. But guess what? It doesn't fix
Mhm.
it.
Still
You can
feels like it.
understand it intellectually, but you can't. That's not how you heal the emotions.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the way you heal the emotions is to go through them. You can't go around them. You got to go through them. My suspicion is that's true for grief and loss, and
Absolutely. I say that all the time. All the
it's
time. It's such a similar comparison there. And I feel like it is. I mean, I feel it is a type of grief in a way that
yeah.
you're mourning the life that you thought you should have had.
Hmm.
And, you know, and that
Yeah.
is a type of grief in itself, I would say. Um,
Well, Well, I want to share this story with you if it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because this is, I mean, I'm 58 now. I wasn't, I didn't start, well, I started this channel in 2019, but I was trying to do other things while I was doing this. I'm actually organized as a nonprofit, and I haven't made money doing this, and that hasn't been my goal.
Yeah.
But at some point, you know, I got to address that because I can't do it for free forever. But or I got to find some way to sustain it. But regardless, I had gone to this workshop, and they called this break free intensive, I think is what it was called. There was a big audience. It was a lady that she was on stage, and she just coached people through, I guess, whatever was holding them back, which typically was some kind of a traumatic experience they'd had, right? And so, you know, it was probably a couple hundred people here, and you know, she does some introductory thing, and then she says, "Now, if you want to come on stage and go through this, then put your name on the piece of paper. We'll have a piece of paper, put it in the hat, and we're going to draw some out." And thinking, I don't want to do that. I looked around the room and I thought, yeah, there's 200 people here. The odds of getting my name drawn out are like nil. What the heck? So I put my name on, and of course, guess what? I was the second one that they called up.
Wow.
And so, you know, I'm mic'd up on the stage, and the lady that had gone on before me with this coach, I guess you'd call her, was also dealing with abandonment. That's how the lady talked about it. And it was her dad too, I think, in that case. And then I come up, and I remember because she made that comment, well, I guess we're just going to get abandonment issues today, you know? And, but, you know, and she talked me through it and a little bit, but it was an interesting experience. But the bottom line was she made me commit to going and talking. She says, you need to go, this will sound crazy, but go talk to a tree, go out in the woods and talk to a tree as though it is your dad. And, you know, I'm thinking, okay, so I'm an engineer. You know, that all sounds like woo woo, crazy, stupid. You guys are weird kind of stuff, you know, but, you know, she's got the pressure of the audience and me on stage. She says, see, you're avoiding this. You know, you won't do this. Why? I said, okay, I'll do it. And she says, when? You know, and I'm going, well, I don't know. I got to look at my calendar to see when I can do this. And she said, see, you're avoiding it, you know. So I finally said, okay, next Tuesday at 2:00. Okay. And report back to me. So I picked a place in my mind. I went out. Ironically, the place I picked doesn't have any trees. So I had a conversation with a bush.
Okay, well, close enough.
And again, I would probably phrase this conversation differently, because if someone had told me this in my, you know, employment days, or when I wasn't ready for it, I'd think you guys are nuts and forget it. I'm not doing that. But you know, I made this commitment. I went out there, and I was already starting to make videos for young men growing up without a dad. And I did have my phone and filmed a little bit of, you know, I'm driving out here to do this, and, you know, we'll see what happens. And then I filmed some after, but that's when I learned, Brooke, you can't, you understand logically, but until you go through the emotions, you don't heal. Healing is on the other side of the emotions, not on the other side of the thoughts. You can't think yourself into recovery from grief or pain or hurt or trauma. You got to go through the emotions. And that's why we avoid it, because it's not fun. It hurts. It's painful.
Definitely.
And
That is so profound. I love that.
Well, you know, I think of, in my case, you know, I think of yours. I mean, I can only imagine. It's like, boy, and you shared with me, you know, so I know at least you had your son there. It's like, okay, I've still got a purpose, but otherwise I'd be thinking, why? I don't want to be here anymore.
Trust me, I thought that plenty of times, but yeah, you just,
that hurts. That hurts.
But I always tell people, it's always, you know, you always feel like someone has it worse than you, but your grief is your own grief. You know, it's yours alone, and no one's is more than any others. It's just how it's impacting you personally. Do you mind if I ask, and you didn't know I was going to ask you this ahead of time, so if you don't want to answer, you have to answer. What? So I know with your real dad, you know, you said you felt the anger and kind of the resentment, and there wasn't really that that closure, so it took you kind of longer to emotionally deal with that, which again is totally normal. Um, what was it like, or how was it different with the person who kind of stepped up as your dad?
Oh, yeah. Um, well, are you particularly when he passed away, are you
Yeah.
thinking?
Yeah, I
Or
mean, how was, I guess, the grief different, or how did you
yeah.
react to his death
Well,
differently?
I can even, my mom passed away in 2018, I think. Um, and I wouldn't even consider those as grief, to be honest. I mean, mom was, I think, 4 days away from her 89th birthday, and Mark had lived to an older age. At that point, it's their loss is in some ways A, to be expected, and B, the best thing that can happen to them at that
Yeah.
point, because their health is, they're in more pain living than they are passing on. And so it wasn't grief. It was definitely sadness. In fact, I remember he wasn't the only guy in my life. In fact, the guy that lived across the street from him was another guy that they would go camping with us too. And so he was important, and he was there at the funeral. I remember giving him a hug and just crying on his shoulder,
Mm.
because those two in particular, I think he's still alive. He's got to be in his 90s now. Um, but in adulthood, I've drifted. I don't want to say I've drifted apart. I mean, I've got my life,
Yeah.
and we didn't go camping in the summers together anymore, and I didn't live around the corner, so I haven't seen him for a long time. So the emotion's not as strong. And again, in that case, it's to be expected. I don't even feel like I had grief, which I guess I did, because I bawling at the funeral and stuff like that when mom passes away. But she's dying slowly of cancer, and it's like, boy, for her sake, I wish she could.
Yeah.
Because it's harder for her to be here still than to move on.
Yeah.
So,
That's a
yeah.
great way to think of it, and it's awesome that you acknowledge that and that you can share that with us, because so many people, even though they know that it might be better, they feel so guilty about feeling
Mhm.
that way. They think they're a horrible person if they're, relieved, even if it's the end of someone's suffering. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had that with
Mm.
my mom as well, with her cancer, so I
Yeah.
can empathize with that one. But yeah, I know a lot of people kind of struggle with that, you know, feeling
Well,
guilty that they feel that it was probably the best thing to happen. So,
yeah, feeling guilty that they're glad. I remember it was, I had the good fortune of me and two of my brothers. And my mom just basically, she was on hospice, but she was in her home, and she was in one room, and I would, she had a cancer that, uh, mucosal melanoma or something. So it was basically a melanoma. Like if it was on your skin, it'd be no big deal, but it was in her nasal passages and
oh,
spread into the oral cavity. And so I would have to be in there helping. It got to be where it blocked, and sometimes she either couldn't breathe or couldn't swallow or would get stuck, and I'd be helping her suck it out of her mouth or stuff like that. And I just slept on a little mattress outside her room. uh, and two of my brothers were there, but when she finally passed, and um, it was, her body is on the bed. The mortuary, the funeral directors hadn't come, but we'd been in touch with them, and they said, we'll have someone there, and me and my siblings are having dinner around the dining room table.
mm. Mm.
And I remember at that time thinking, this is awkward.
Surreal. It's surreal. Like, it's such a
Well,
weird.
no, I guess what I remember thinking is this should feel awkward, but it didn't. I
Mm.
mean, we're having dinner. Mom's body's in the other room. We're waiting for the the people to come and collect her body and then, and move on with other things. But, we'd been going through this together. So at that point, your brain shifts into logistical whatever. And she hadn't, I mean, she hadn't even, I think the last time she'd spoken was a couple days before that. And even before that, they weren't necessarily coherent at that point. But it's funny, I did mention that in my book, because her last word was, so I go into her room one night, and she's lying in this bed, and she's got her arms up like this, and I walk in and I said, "Mom, what are you doing?" And she said, "Exercise." So
oh, that's great.
I know. I sat down next to her and I said, "Mom, you can exercise tomorrow. Why don't you just rest now?" So she put her arms down, and that was the last word that I think she even said, because I don't think she even spoke the next day. And I had actually came home for Sunday, that Sunday. That was a Saturday evening, and I called my brothers, and I had been living down there and with them, and she said, "Yeah, she hasn't really been conscious." But so I stayed overnight here, and then I went back Monday, and it was Monday afternoon that we finally discovered that she wasn't breathing anymore. We've been checking on her every 15 minutes. So in some 15-minute increments, she finally passed away. But again, so sitting at that table, it was feeling like, I don't feel like this is awkward, but it should be, So I don't know, a big range of emotions for your audience and for those going through grief. It's you're just gonna go through it. I talk about it, I get emotional. I didn't think I would. I had to stand up and get my Kleenex to be closer, because I should have known
That's
better.
what we do here. Sorry.
Being interviewed by you, I should have known better and had him here. I had him close, but anyway.
Yeah, it kind of lends itself to that around here. But okay, well, let's give it. Thank you very much for discussing those things, because yeah, I mean, my audience loves to hear different stories, about grief and what other people are experiencing, and that is the whole goal, is to get people talking about it and being emotional and being open about how they feel, whether it's awkward or not awkward, or makes you sad or makes you angry. It's all part of it. So thank you. You did mention your book, that you talked about it, your mom, in your book a little bit, but can you? We'll get back to your stuff. Can you talk about your latest book and what's in it and how it can help people?
Yeah. And I thank you for the opportunity. I'd love to. Before I do, I want to make sure I do this, because for you and for all the single moms out there, I just take my hat off. Sometimes because I focus on boys, I get comments sometimes that, you're misogynist, you don't like girls, which could not be further from the truth. And at first I was defensive, and now it's going to happen. People are going to say that. And that's not true. I think the best thing I can do to help young ladies is to help them have some capable, loving adult men with whom to associate, because the biggest challenge I think they have is that there are very, very, very slim pickings. And a lot of it is because they haven't had dads to help them learn how to be good men or good male role models. So my hat is off to you single moms. I watch now. My mom raised 5 kids by herself. I think I remember when my wife and I, actually, she had 4 siblings and we had 5 kids, for surviving kids. We had the one miscarriage, but more than one, but one later term miscarriage. And so I remember with me and my wife, when our kids were small, life is really busy. And I remember thinking, 2 of us can't do this together. I mean, it's like killing us. How could my mom do that? And now she had 5, and I saw a lot of what she went through by observation. but boy, my hat is off to you, because it is not easy to be a single mom. So any single moms in your audience, I just honor you, and my hat is off to you, and hang in there.
Well, thank you.
Because as much as you feel like your kids don't appreciate you or aren't turning out the way you want them to, or whatever, hang in there, because
Yeah, well, thank
hopefully one day
you.
they'll appreciate it and recognize it.
And honestly, anyone who watches your videos, I don't think they get it unless they watch your videos. Anyone who would say something about you, not caring about girls. One, you have daughters.
Yeah, yeah.
How many? Yes.
One of them is in my
and
videos. Yeah.
and two, I love the way that you put that about raising these young men into grown men who can be good husbands and fathers. And that is so obvious on your channel and in your videos. I mean, just the one where you're making spaghetti. How many times you say in that video alone, like, you throw in things about if you're cooking something for your sweetheart, or you want to impress or help out,
Yeah.
help out your loved one. And then at the end, you serve your wife dinner and give her a kiss. And it's just so, I mean, you can feel that energy behind it, and that purpose behind it is not just to help boys, but basically helping families in general, So anyway, sorry, that was a side note, but
no, but part of what hurts about not having a dad is not having those family experiences, the positive, loving, in-home family experiences. And one of the messages I want them to get is that they can still have them. They can, from the adult side, not from the kid side. But it's not easy. It's going to take some effort. You got to learn how to do this stuff, and you got to do it, and and that gets into the book stuff. But
yeah,
but because I want them to have that happiness that they didn't have as a kid, or maybe didn't have, and they can, but from the perspective of an adult dad, or husband or father, in those cases. So it's still possible. They didn't miss out on everything. They can.
Yeah.
But there's two things. They got to heal from their own, and then they got to put in the effort and learn. And that's a good segue into the book. So someone asked me, I told about Mark Gould right now, and how important he was to me. And someone asked, well, did he have specific things he was teaching you? And the answer is no, he didn't. He was just there, and if something came up, he'd show me how to do it, or on our camping trips or whatever, by observation, or he did teach me how to ride motorcycle, and then his son-in-law was on the camping trips and stuff. But I got thinking, well, what are the things that, I've started this YouTube channel. Are there specific things that I think a young man particularly, but anyone that's growing up without a dad, might be at risk of not getting? And I came up with 4 main areas. I mean, one is self-discipline. Traditional, wait until your father gets home, right? I mean, this is, I'm older than you, but I mean, so that's less so now, but it was when I was, because the dad was a disciplinarian in the home, and the mom was the loving, comforting, whatever. So you're at risk of not having self-discipline. Today, parents feel like they need to be their kids' friends more than first, and be accepted by their kids. And that's, let's.
I'm a teacher, so you're preaching to the choir on that one. Yeah.
Well, because that's not the job of parenting. Now, you need to love your kids. That's the most important characteristic and key for success for them, and they'll know it. But being their friend is second. If being their friend is secondary to teaching them right from wrong, then you're setting your kids up for failure. Anyway, I didn't mean to go into this. So one of the risks is self-discipline. So I mapped it out. Well, I got a graphic that kind of shows it.
Oh,
so
great.
The map to manhood is what I call this. So there's 4 paths. The first one's the self-discipline path. The second one is relationships, learning social skills, because that's a hard thing too. Asking girls on dates, is the quintessential one from growing up without a dad, and maybe. But anyone, or being asked out on a date, or these days girls ask guys out too, which is fantastic. I mean, it made it easier for me when I got asked out. Oh, yeah. Unless I didn't want to go with her, and then it's the awkward thing. But even then, at least you know what it's like for her if you ask someone that doesn't want to go with you. But the social skills, and not just the dating and developing relationships that might turn into a marriage or a long-term relationship, but even just interacting with other people. I mean, we've had COVID and we have electronics. You can spend your whole day scrolling through this. Well, you're not learning how to interact with people in confident, comfortable ways. So social skills is another area that you're at risk of. The biggest one, and when I first drew this map and came up with these things, the third one was the one, you can't see the dots because they're kind of light green on a dark green, but this third one is the most important path, and that's learning to love. And the biggest challenge there is learning to love yourself, for the reasons we've already talked about. You internalize something's wrong with me, or my dad would still be in my life. Why does my dad not want to be with me? And as a kid, again, in my scenario, because it doesn't apply to if you had an abusive dad, if your dad died in surgery or an accident or something like that, then that's not necessarily the same scenario. But in my case, dad left me. If he left me, something must be wrong with me, because as a kid, adults are like gods. They don't make mistakes. So something must be wrong with me. And again, you learn that intellectually, right, but that doesn't heal from it. And that healing comes through learning to love, and ultimately learning to love yourself. And that's the biggest challenge. And then the last one is finding a purpose, discovering what your purpose is, and then living your purpose. So that gets more into the practical stuff. But even if you go through all that other stuff, you learn social skills, you learn self-discipline, and you learn how to love yourself. If you don't recognize that you're here for a reason and you're not working on whatever that is, then you're still going to flounder. So you need to have some direction. And once you have that direction, boy, the stars can align. And again, like I say at the end of most every video, is you can still succeed, even though your dad may not be in your daily life. I think those are the lessons that may be lacking if you haven't had a good positive male role model in your life. And so that's what's in the book. It's kind of a workbook along with the lessons that have to do with that stuff. So that's what the book's about.
It's great. It is a great read. And I have to tell you, I was kind of floored when I was reading it, because already I've written my book and it's in like the editing phase right now. The amount of overlap, because mine, yours is the map to manhood, for these boys without a dad, and mine is to help people who are grieving kind of get through that grief journey. And there were so many similarities with the steps to take for that same thing. And it's all about just kind of, getting through that journey in the healthiest way possible. But yeah, I was really surprised by the amount of
I gotta get your book then.
Overlaps in that. It's coming. It's
yeah, I know
the editing, but yeah, it should be pretty soon. But yeah, it was fascinating. But so much of it, so much with healing from anything is starting with the basics of, making sure that you're eating, foods that are healthy for you, at least a little bit, and getting a little bit of exercise, and, learning how to love yourself and accept yourself for who you are, and learning how to deal with people, for me, it's after something terrible happens, how do you get back into the world and talk to people again? So I think it would be immensely useful for anyone who has lost a father. But yeah, I mean, young men in particular who, if they've had a dad that's passed away, just completely invaluable. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and your help with everyone. If you could give, just one piece of advice or two pieces of advice to someone who has lost a dad, since that is more my audience, what would be something you would tell someone who's lost a dad?
It's going to take time, and just let it take the time that it's going to take. Don't try to rush it. Don't try to get through it faster, because don't try to push it into your subconscious and ignore it or avoid it, because it hurts. It's going to take some time, and it's going to hurt. And so just realize that, and it'll be a roller coaster. So when you're in those valleys, then go bawl in a room, if that's what you got to do. Put your head in a pillow and cry.
Absolutely.
But one other thing that is really helpful, and this is in the book too, get a book and write. Journal. If you can write about your feelings, that is a fantastic way to process the thoughts and the emotions. And I got, so you can see the shelves behind me right here.
Yeah.
All those books, journals. I mean, these are $1 at the store.
Oh, I love that.
And just every day I'm taking notes. Now, some of it's practical, but journal, write it down, write down your memories. I mean, and capture your fond ones too. Don't, the reality that he's gone now, or whoever you lost is gone, but write about the fun memories too, because that will bring those back. And guess what? You get to keep those the rest of your life too. So yeah, they may not be here anymore, but you've had some experiences, hopefully some positive ones. I mean, if they weren't, you wouldn't be feeling grief. So capture those, write those down. Tell yourself in here write down all your feelings, but then give yourself the best piece of advice you would give someone else that was in that situation. And write that down. So those are a couple of thoughts and ideas. If you're going through grief, I think that will help you process it positively.
Great suggestions. Thank you so much. So where can people find you?
mystepdad.org is my website. The My Stepdad YouTube channel is the other one. You can go to maptomanhood.org, but that just links you back to the website anyway. So mystepdad.org is the website. That's where they can find me, or info@mystepdad.org or dad@mystepdad.org. Try to reserve the dad email for the kids, but they both come to the same inbox, so either one works.
Great. All right. Well, is there anything else that you want to talk about or promote or anything else like that?
No, I think we covered more than I planned on. But I hope it's been helpful. I mean, Brooke,
it's amazing. Thank you.
is important too. And I think for your audience particularly, because not a lot of people I think are willing to do what you're doing, and particularly with you're still going through the pain and the loss too. So I just thank you for doing what you're doing, and I hope those that are connecting with you are expressing their gratitude too, because it's a tremendous help in a time of need.
Thank you. All right. Well, James, thank you so much for taking the time
to speak
with me and with my audience, and best of luck with the new book. Where is that out now? Can people get copies of that?
Yeah, Amazon. You just go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's out there, hard copy.
The Map to Manhood.
Map to Manhood paperback. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, James. I really appreciate it.
It's a treat.
Have a good rest of your day.
All right, you too.